Welcome to The Impact Effect, hosted by conscious leadership expert Tom Eddington, advisor to some of the world's most successful companies and CEOs, where each week we help executives, entrepreneurs, and organizers become more effective leaders while growing businesses that are making an impact in the world. And now, here's Tom.
Hi, welcome to the Impact Effect Network, a place where we discuss making business matter through conscious leadership. I'm Tom Eddington. My guest today is Eric Kaufman, CEO and founder of Sagatica. So welcome, Eric. Great to have you on the show today.
Thank you, Tom. I'm truly delighted to spend time with you.
Well, it's always a pleasure. Anytime we've been together, I've always enjoyed it. So I'd like to just share with our audience a bit about you and your history in scuba diving and your years in meditation and the work you've done in the business world and most importantly, the work you're doing around conscious leadership. Could you share a bit with our audience about who you are and how you came to do what you're doing?
Happily, I am a husband and father. I am a Zen practitioner. I am a consultant and executive coach for the past 20 years. I grew up, I'm a multinational sort of global citizen, having lived and worked in Israel, South Africa, the United States. And I am, as my friends refer to me as, a guardian at the gate. My life and my work is really focused on where the two worlds of the world of the manifest, the world of, facts and figures and results and outcomes and pursuit of achievement, and the world of depth and wisdom and insight and wonder and awe and spirit, where they come together. That's where I dwell most regularly, and that's what I'm passionate about.
And how did you find yourself there, Eric?
I found myself there. I was young. I was 19 or so, and I was simply bombing out in college. I was failing all my classes. I was having a fantastic time following the Grateful Dead, but nothing was amounting to any kind of significant forward-looking accomplishment in my life. And so I was about 19 years old. I realized I had to get something under control, and what I had to get under control was my mind and my heart. And so, in short order, I'll skip over all the sort of painful experiments, but I ended up in a meditation community, in a Zen practice, and moved into the community before I turned 20, and I ended up living this communal experience for 11 years. So it was a very, my whole 20s was spent in a, I graduated college. I went to work at 3M. I went to work at Corning. I worked at these, big Fortune 500s, but concurrently I was living in a spiritual community. And so the two were not sort of, I didn't intend it to be my calling or my work. Those are my two worlds. And at some point the two worlds became entwined in a sort of a inevitably laminated way.
So I have to say, particularly for our young listeners, how did you arrive at that decision at age 19? I mean, that's pretty remarkable to have the maturity to make such a decision. Where did that come from?
Yeah, Tom, I'd love to assign it to maturity, but I had actually just been kicked out of college. And so I really figured that I needed to do something to get my life back on track. And I had this profound realization that it was me that was out of control. It wasn't the circumstances. It wasn't the bad teachers. It wasn't the terrible administration. It wasn't the awful classes. It wasn't my girlfriends or the Grateful Dead. I was out of control. And so once that became crystal clear, then I don't know. I mean, it's easy to assign maturity in retrospect. I don't know that I deserve the sort of the 19-year-old version of me maybe doesn't deserve the title maturity, but desperation. Right? I desperately wanted to stop the track that I was on, and it was a bad track. And so, this is the mid 80s, right? Meditation in Southern California was a thing. And so it seemed like the right way to go. And I thank whomever the hell you thank for that moment and for the many years that have passed.
I don't want to dwell on it, but can you share just a bit more insight into where that may have come from? I mean, it's just a remarkable decision that you made. Can you think back and try and source where that may have come from? A mentor, a parent, a friend, or just insight, divine intervention?
I think that it's a good question. There was some influence from my parents, although at that time I wasn't in any kind of communication with them. But in my childhood, my parents themselves were involved in some forms of New Age or 70s type spiritual pursuits. I had actually ended up through one form or another going to an astrologer who had done a chart for me that meant very little to me at the time. And she introduced me to somebody who was one of the teachers in this community. And as I'd gone around sort of trying to sort out how does one get their mind under control, it hadn't even occurred to me at that age that I also had to open up my heart. It was really just about sharpening my mind. And so when I was going around, I went to the Hare Krishnas, I went to the Orthodox Jews, I went to the born again Christians, I went to the, a variety of Hindu places. And when I landed on sort of the Zen Buddhist approach, I was, oh, this resonates at a deep level, right? Because it wasn't just about sort of followership. It was about practice. It was about how do I touch upon the possibility rather than how do I just sort of abide by the rules in order to be a better human. So I think that resonated deeply for me and continues to this day. I mean, the notion of the felt sense experience of morality and truth and power and source and love, that is what moves a human, I think. Externally oriented moral compass of you should, you must, don't stray. So yeah, thanks for the question. That's as best as I can get right now.
Well, thanks for sharing that, because I think it's important as we get through this conversation today. My impression is that has informed the work you do. It's informed the life and the choices you've made. So I wanted to explore that a bit with you. So let's talk a bit about when you were at 3M and Corning, and you had your practice, and how did you integrate that into your work? How did it inform it? And most importantly, how did that help catapult your success?
I'm going to distinguish between the pre-30 Eric and the post-30 Eric, because there was a very significant event that took place right around 30, 31. But I would say how my practice integrated. So, I went to work in sales and then in marketing and then in management and then, as a director. And at a young age, I was on fire. I mean, just picture and imagine this, Tom, right? It's a corporation focused, like many corporations are, on producing remarkable results. There's a structure, process, there's culture, there's rules. And I'm in there as this insanely focused, disciplined, because I would wake up in the morning in the community at 5 a.m. We'd start, we'd put on the robes, we'd start our meditations, we'd do our various tasks, whatever I would do that morning, whether it was, breakfast prep or breakfast cleanup or clean out the horse stalls or whatever it was. Then I'd go back, shower, change into my, work clothes, go to work. But my whole life was really this devotion to disciplined self-awareness and practice. So as a salesman, sales was easy. I mean, sales was easier than being at home, in the community. Marketing, any of the disciplines were easy. So everything that we know today about mindfulness and how it sharpens the mind and gives you sort of this capacity for creativity and awareness and insight, true. And I was doing that in my 20s. What I didn't have sort of in my 20s to go along with that intense, beautiful focus and drive and discipline, I didn't have a lot of access to heart. It was very wisdom-based and not very compassion-oriented. And so I have a huge sort of warning, as it were, for practitioners these days around getting too out of balance. I think I was out of balance in the domain of the ninja capacity of, muscling through anything, not having the heart open. So Yeah, so that's important to distinguish. When I was 30, so I'll pause there. Let me before I sort of plow on. But
Well, I'd like you to plow on a little bit because I've got a
is
question I
there?
want to circle back to.
Okay, so when I was about 30, I think I was 30, I had this revelation that my life was now, uh, too split up, right? That I'm living this spiritual pursuit and this professional pursuit, and that the two were. Oh, I have a friend of mine from Texas. He described it probably in the best way, the way Texans can describe things. He said, when I described to him what I was feeling, he said, "Oh, you have one foot on the boat and one foot on the dock, and you're running out of crotch." So that's exactly how I felt, and it was a decision. And the decision for me was, do I deepen my professional commitment and just go into that full out, or do I deepen my spiritual commitment and go into that full out? And when I really looked into my heart, it was the spiritual commitment. And so I actually decided and did. I quit my job. I gave away my money. I shaved my head. I gave away my possessions, and I drove up. We had a property in New Mexico, and I drove up and built a cabin in the woods there, and proceeded to take a year-long silent retreat to meditate in the woods. And that's why I'm making the distinction, right? Because that long retreat was a profound shift, literally a profound shift. I'm not using that word lightly, in moving the center of gravity of my consciousness from my head to my heart. And emerging out of there, what emerged was this profound, felt, embodied experience of being in the heart. And the issue was that I didn't really know how to activate that in practice. I just knew what it felt like in my body. And so that, the past 20 some odd years have been about the blending of that, right? The wisdom, the compassion, and the blended work as it pertains to my own body and spirit, to my relationship with my wife, with my kids, and absolutely everything that I do professionally.
Thank you for sharing that. It brought tears to my eyes as you shifted to share that story. But more importantly, I could feel just energetically as you were describing. I could feel the shift to my heart, and it brought tears to my eyes. That was beautiful.
Thank you.
So the focus is on conscious leadership, and you've talked a couple of times about self-awareness. You've talked about the journey that you've gone through to raise that level of self-awareness, to integrate your head and your heart. I'd love for you to describe how do you define conscious leadership, and talk a bit about the work you're doing today.
So the first thing that I'm keen to define is my sort of working definition of what a leader is before we go into conscious leader. And so I have a very simple, but I think effective definition. I say that a leader is somebody who organizes and influences people to achieve meaningful results. So organize and influence, get folks to work together, whether that's at the one-on-one or team or whole organization. And influence meaning to cause them to move in a certain direction in order to achieve meaningful results, meaningful for their organization, and results of the outcomes of the work. So that's a leader: organize and influence people to achieve meaningful results. Then what is conscious, right? And that's a conversation that is right at the heart of what we're talking about. And the way I define conscious these days is it's an unresisting awareness of present moment and interconnection. And that could get a little philosophical. It's not meant to be, but it's an unresisting awareness, meaning that there's a presence to reality that is not fighting, offending, or denying, or distorting, right? So an unresisting awareness of the present moment, in other words, as life as it is right now, and interconnection, the way all things are related and connected and inevitably are one. And so a conscious leader is someone who leads with conscious awareness, meaning they recognize what's going on inside them and outside them, what's going on inside the organization and outside the organization. They're aware of the effects of decisions and actions, and the interconnection of multiple forces and factors and people. And so that's essentially someone who is moved from being self-centered, which is an inward about me, mine, and I, to life-centered, which is not excluding the self-centered, but it includes and transcends the self-centered, moving from the ego kind of defensive position to a life-focused service position with awareness.
Thank you for sharing that. The piece I didn't hear you say, but I'm assuming it's implied, is taking responsibility for one's actions, for that awareness.
I didn't say that, and you're right, it is implied. I guess it's one of those implicit understandings, right? That I am a co-creator of my reality and that I own the experience that I'm having. I mean, to me, it's in my book. The whole first, of my 4 virtues, my book is called The 4 Virtues of a Leader. The first virtue is focus, and it's really the question, what am I creating? And I literally write in there, my world is my reflection, that's a radical responsibility, right? My
Yes.
world is my reflection. If you like what you see, so Mark is a CEO of a $50 million business, is an awesome human being. He's very unhappy about the way that his, what he calls his chiefs team, his C-suite folks are functioning. They've been together for 5 years. It's not like this is a new group of folks. So Mark has to look at that reflection and own it. He's
Yes.
responsible for co-creating the reality of his experience. And
Yes.
so yes, 100%.
Good. Yeah, that's very consistent with the work that I do. And I think each of us as leaders need to take responsibility for the world we've created.
I think that blame is one of the antithetical behaviors to leadership, because leadership is and especially as you rise into the executive, more and more senior and senior roles, part of what, and I share this with my executive clients, and to some of them it's obvious, to some of them it's a bit of a revelation, right? But part of the reason they get paid what they get paid is because they have to shoulder a level of stress and responsibility that is unlike other parts of the organization. And that is the role of a leader, right? Is to willingly bear that load and then consciously distribute it to get it done. So
Yes.
it's both, they have to willingly hold it and consciously distribute it.
So we've touched on a couple of the qualities that you define as being a conscious leader. So we've talked about self-awareness, we've talked about blame, we've talked about distributing that load. What are some other qualities of conscious leadership that you work with your clients to help them own and understand?
So there are 3 key qualities that I'm very dogged about repeating over and over as part of the process we work through. And so wisdom is one, love is another, and courage is a third. There are others, there are many more, but those are the 3 sort of central features, right? And so wisdom is seeing below the surface and beyond the obvious, right? So wisdom is the capacity for both insight and perspective. It's the understanding of things that are interconnected. It's the understanding of cause and effect. It's the capacity to have a perspective and see the impact of and the consequences of things. So that's wisdom. Love is wanting to do well for others. Love is the care, the compassion, the humility, the capacity for gratitude, all those things that are about service, about tending to, about nurturing, and about connecting, right? Love is very much love is about connecting and expanding and including. And then courage. Courage is about authenticity and about action and about willing to explore beyond the comfort zone. We can go more into either of those, but those are sort of the 3, and many of the things like responsibility or accountability or, awareness, they fit into one of those 3 pieces.
You're watching the Impact Effect Network. Who you are is how you lead. Conscious leadership is an intuitive, intentional process requiring an open heart, an open mind, and a committed desire to fully own how you show up in the world. If you're a CEO, a solopreneur, or a community leader, Tom Eddington's ebook helps you amplify your strengths, making you the best version of yourself. Download the ebook today and become a part of bringing conscious leadership to the planet.
Of those three qualities or attributes, which do you find are the most challenging or hardest for your clients to address and work through?
So before I get into those three qualities, I'll tell you what I see as the biggest hurdle of every executive. It is ego, self-awareness, and self-management. Flat out. That's the issue. And that yields the second biggest hurdle, which is lack of meaningful, real-time, substantive conversations and dialogue in the executive team. And so it's that ego, self-management, and which then yields ineffective conversations, which is the plight of every executive and executive team at some level or another. But then to ask, is it wisdom or is it love or is it courage? Flat out, the piece that's no, I mean, it's not that fixed. It's not that fixed. The love can manifest in many ways. Love is caring for and tending to one another, and there are many teams who do that well, right? Perhaps the one that's most frequently absent is courage. Willing to walk towards what you'd rather run away from. It's part of why, the ego is really fundamentally the device that we have on board in our sort of, human software as a defense mechanism. It's a protection mechanism. And so we are essentially hardwired, neurologically wired to be suspicious and anxious and frightened. And so to bring courage online as an actual day-to-day practice is one of the elements that unlocks love and unlocks wisdom in a much more profound way. And so I would say that it's that willingness to engage discomfort, awkwardness, and uncertainty that is the most disruptive, consistent behavior among teams.
It's interesting as you're describing it. What's showing up for me is a Venn diagram of wisdom, courage, and love, and trying to tease those out. I suspect is quite challenging for you in your coaching and consulting work, but also for your clients as they're trying to wrestle with their challenges.
Well, and what helps is to share this model with clients and then help them self-diagnose. I don't necessarily have to be the genius. I mean, the beautiful thing about coaching, as distinct from, say, consulting, right, is that coaching is a collaborative process, right? So I'm assuming that they are quite competent, and they're assuming that I am competent as well, and we're entering into a dialogue collaboratively. And so bringing these models into it and having an exploration about where it's missing, most mature, intelligent folks can look at a diagram or a Venn diagram like that and do some self-analysis and say, once I explain it, here's what courage is, here's what wisdom is, here's what love is, and they can say, oh, I'm not being courageous, or I'm not really tapping into love for my teammates, or I'm not being wise, I'm being very narrow or myopic in my views. And so it isn't actually, one of the nice things about this model is it's simple. And one of the powers of simplicity is accessibility. And what we have to do, you and I, Tom, and the rest of our tribe, is not to make conscious leadership more obtuse and more sophisticated, but more simple and accessible, not for the purposes of dumbing it down, but for the purpose of giving access. I think that is one of the most critical and valuable services that I and you and our colleagues do in the space, is we help people access their own experience of being a conscious being and making choices from that place. And then when they access it, they can make the decisions they want about who they are and how they function.
So when you think about the courage dimension, obviously the ego is a self-defense mechanism to make it difficult to deal with the courage. What are some of the other things that you're seeing, whether it's at the organizational level or the societal level, that also make the courage and really addressing the courage dimension a challenge for folks?
I think one of the I mean, there's a couple of things that come to mind, Tom. So one is that we have sold people on this notion that they can be fearless. And so, and I believe fundamentally that that's baloney. That's not going to happen. Like I said, fear is the sort of the fear is the basic mood of the ego, right? It's the basic mood of our neurological system. And so the idea that we can be fearless has become somewhat popular. And yes, if you take enough drugs of one kind or another, for a moment, you will lose all your fear, and you will likely cause great damage to yourself and others, right? So the notion of fearlessness is disruptive because we're aiming for the wrong thing, rather than courage, which is walking towards what you'd rather run away from. In other words, courage has nothing to do with being fearless. Courage has everything to do with being devoted to something. And that's the other part that I think we've missed in our society is devotion. And I think you and I shared this conversation some months ago, and I was saying, I heard this definition of devotion that just makes my heart sing, because for the first time I get devotion in a way that really works for me. And it was described as, what can you not do?
Yes.
And I think that rather than cultivating a society of devotees, people who are following their calling, what their spirit wants them to do, what their heart wants them to do, we have developed and continue to cultivate a society of dilettantes and distractible, pleasure-seeking, damn near automatons, and I think that when you go that deep into the realm of losing touch with your consciousness, with your body, with your heart, with your spirit, with other people, and with the interconnection of all of life, then how do you bring courage online when you don't even know what it feels like that you're in fear? It's such a, we're culturally subduing and dimming our access to the subtle aspects of our own state of being. And so we can't distinguish when we're scared, when we're anxious, when we're terrified, when we're just hungry, when we're bored. It all becomes, oh, I'll just play a game on my phone. And so, with my children, with my clients, but I'll talk about my children. I mean, I love my clients, but they don't quite compare to how much I love my children. And my daughter has just graduated high school. She's going off to her adventure. And my younger daughter is, 16, I guess 16 and a half now. I have labored diligently, sometimes to their chagrin, to ensure that they have a very clear sense of their own inner experience and the capacity not only to get it, but to articulate it. Because when you can listen within and give it voice without, that is a remarkable capacity for conscious living and making choices. And I think that as we have dumbed down our society, first just by accident and then by commercial convenience, we have really dimmed out consciousness. And so, it takes some consciousness to be courageous, because you have to choose to do something that you would rather not do. And if you don't have access to the subtlety of what choices you're making unconsciously, then you can't make conscious choices.
You're watching the Impact Effect Network, the world's first 24-hour on-demand business and leadership video and podcast network, bringing conscious leadership to a global audience.
I'd love to shift this conversation into the workplace. And how do you, in the work that you do, how do you create and help foster that same kind of consciousness, that same kind of awareness with your clients in the workplace? And I love that example of what you've done as a parent and what you're seeing in your daughters. And could you share some examples like that for our listeners in terms of what's possible in the workplace?
Yeah, sure. So I'll use Tim as an example. Tim is a CEO, has been a CEO for many years, a Fortune 1000 company. He has his MBA. He has 2 degrees in engineering and an MBA. Wicked smart, incredible clock speed in his capacity to process. He literally can almost outthink anyone in the room, legitimately so, and has done a great job with the business until the market conditions changed and the business started to suddenly, hit major headwinds. And so when somebody recommended that I be an executive coach for him, he was open to the idea as a way to sort of sharpen his mind. And so we got to meet people where they begin, right? Um, there's no way I could sharpen this guy's mind, by the way. This guy was sharp. Is sharp. He's still sharp. Um, what we needed to do was to help him grow in awareness, right? So there's simple things. Some things are so simple. So for example, I challenged him for a week to go into all of his meetings, every meeting he has with more than one person, right? So any kind of small or large group meeting, and that he would challenge himself to speak 50% less than how much he normally speaks. And you'd say, well, what's the big deal now? That's just behavior mod. Well, no, it wasn't intended for behavior mod. It was intended for him. And I don't know if you know this exercise, the left-hand column, where you take a piece of paper, you draw kind of a column about on the left, about a third of the page, and the 2/3 of the column, or the 2/3 of the page on the right is everything that you're right that is happening, right? Brenda said this, Sandy said this. I've got to remember to do that, right? It's all the facts and figures of what's happening in the meeting. And the column on the left, the left-hand column, is designed for a reflection column. What am I feeling? What am I thinking? What am I afraid of? What am I angry at? What's triggering me right now? So when Tim cut his input by half, he had way more time to capture the left-hand column, right? And so that's a great, easy, accessible awareness exercise. And for the first time, he began to see two things. One, that he is not paying any attention to what anyone's saying. That was kind of remarkable to him, which people have been telling him for years. But for the first time, he saw that he was so freaking busy in his own experience, he was just not attentive. And the other thing that he saw was just how much other people have to bring to the table when he gives them the space. And so we began to work on this kind of level of awareness, and it's rudimentary, but it's critical. Awareness is the foundation of consciousness. And so he eventually, within a month or a month and a half, came up with this idea that he wanted to be able to respond versus react. Now, to you and I, that sounds, familiar and normal, but for him, that was a revelation. And so, that was the beginning of a journey for him to really slow down, pay attention. I really wanted him to meditate, but the guy was just not going to meditate, although he was a triathlete on top of it all, right? This guy's an animal. He's awesome. But I found this wonderful study, and I forget where it came from, that did brain scans of meditators and found that the actual size, the size of the amygdala, the actual tissue size of the amygdala in the brain shrinks with repetitive meditation practices. And I shared that with Tim. He's like, okay, then I'm going to meditate. I want to shrink my amygdala because he wanted to respond rather than react. And the amygdala is all about reactive mode. Right. And so, that's kind of an example of the beginning, right? How do we grow an awareness within, and then awareness in relationship with others? And then essentially the goal is how to become a conscious being at choice. That's really my effort with clients, is right. How do you become a conscious being at choice?
And how do you enlist them in wanting to make that decision? Is that they're self-selecting by bringing you in, or is that an intentional conversation you get them to commit to?
It's somewhat self-selecting. If not 100%, but probably 60% of my client experience, they already have some interest. And then with senior folks, the reality is that they are not going to get better at what they're doing by learning a radically new skill or being better at reading an Excel spreadsheet or being more savvy about strategy. The distinction at the senior level is mindset.
Yes. It's
the way they are thinking, believing, expecting, and behaving as a result. And so we have that conversation, right? That the shift for them at this level is not going to be another Harvard weekend on, finance for non-CFOs. That helps, but that's not going to make the kind of lasting impact they want. And so there's a series of conversations we can have about mindset, right? Because that's accessible. Everyone understands mindset. And then mindset includes heart set, right? Where are you coming from as a heart-centered human? And I will say that in the professional realm, even the word professional for us, Tom, you probably run across this, right? Professional means what? It means I'm hardening my heart so that I can behave in ways that are really unkind, right? And learning how to remain in difficult, messy conversations while leaving your heart still open and remembering that connection of human to human. That's a really beautiful expression of conscious leadership.
It absolutely is. And what I love about our conversation today is the journey that you were on and how you arrived at that point of opening your heart in that year that you were away on your retreat, and how you've integrated that into the work you're doing.
Yeah, and I don't think anyone's going to be sort of misled or fooled to realize that I'm still a very sort of cognitive oriented, intellectually curious and engaged human, but it's not an either or. I mean, it's all three. It's not even two, right? It's the heart. I mean, it's the head, which I call wisdom, the heart, which is love, and the gut, which is courage, right? So it's really about the head, heart, gut, getting those clarified, aligned, and activated. I think that is where conscious leadership shows up. And there's like remarkable research about the vagal nerve and the vagus and the connection of the head, heart, and gut. And there's beautiful research about actual neural cells that reside that we have neural cells in the heart, we have neural cells in the gut. The vagus, that nerve that connects all three, 70% of the information moves up the vagus nerve, up from the gut and the heart to the head, not down. So there is, when we talk about being embodied, that's part of conscious leadership, right? Is to be in the body, in the head, in the heart, in the gut. And so that's, those are all teachable, accessible elements. And you and I and every one of us has one sort of dominant feature of that, but it's the integration and alignment that I think really switches on this conscious living and the conscious leadership that is most impactful for people and for the planet.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. So you've talked about a couple of the CEOs you've worked with. You've mentioned men. Do you have women that you work with? Do you have people of different generations? And what are you noticing about gender or generational differences and how you're working with them, receptivity, what skill sets, what they need to work on?
So yes, women executives, yes, younger folks in their, I'm going through my list, right? There's a few in their early 30s. There's one gentleman who's not even, I think he's 27 or 28, an entrepreneur, remarkable human being. I think a lot of the distinctions are culture-based distinctions. And then I think with the younger folk, somebody who's 50 or 55 or 60 or in their early 60s is far more competent and experienced and has more to unwind before they can sort of onboard some new ways of being. I think folks who are younger still have, not from a neurological, but more from an attitudinal, they have a little more desire to flex and bend and shape themselves into what they're becoming. Or I will say it differently, there's a point in our career, somewhere in sort of past our mid-40s, where there's more to lose than there is to gain. Right? Reputation, yes. Earning, role, responsibility, power, authority, fame, blah, 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 blah. There's more to lose at a certain point than there is to gain. So when someone is 30 or 32 or 28, they've got so much to gain. When someone is 50, they have so much to lose. That to me is one of the biggest distinctions, because helping somebody who's afraid of losing something, helping them essentially surrender or give up something that has worked for them to date, is a different practice than helping somebody who's younger that has something to gain, and it's all about experimentation and application.
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of on the age level. On the gender piece, my only comment on that is that so my older daughter, who's now 18, a couple of years ago was telling me, we were having a conversation, and she said, this whole feminism thing, I just don't get it. What's the point? She was, she's 16 at that time or so. She's like why are women working so hard? We've already got everything we need. I was thinking, wow, Tara, you are completely oblivious to the amazing effort and energy and pain and suffering, literally the suffrages, right? The suffering that so many women have gone to, your mom, your grandmother, your aunts, to get to the point where you can so blithely think that you have everything as an equality, right? But there's I think still a propensity for female leaders to think that for them to be effective leaders, they have to be more like a male version of themselves, right? Because it's a man's world, or it's a masculine leadership role. And I think that what's most interesting to me, and of course I'm not a woman, so I have limited bandwidth to talk about this, but is helping those women to the best that I can connect with their authentic sense of leadership that is not necessarily some version of a masculine expression of it. And that I find really energizing and enriching, to essentially help these women connect with their sense of power that is not just a mimicry of some other form of power. And I could say that's true for every human, but I think it's because the leadership has been so masculine for so long, that to just have a masculine mimicry for women, I find is not sustainable for them, and does not tap their strengths.
You're watching the Impact Effect Network. Is your team tuned out? Are you looking for a powerful speaker to motivate and inspire your organization? Then Tom Eddington is the choice for keynote speaker at your next conference or event. Tom is one of the most sought-after business advisors and coaches in Silicon Valley. For over 2 decades, Tom has advised world-renowned CEOs and executives on how to catapult their organization's success, including Hewlett-Packard, NBNA Corporation, and Royal Dutch Shell. In his dynamic keynotes, Tom offers fresh new paradigms on how to create healthier, happier, and more purposeful workplaces while navigating change and generating higher degrees of success for organizations. For information on booking Tom at your next event, contact eddingtonadvisory.com.
I think the next question I'd like to explore a little bit is just when you think about the conversation we've had today and the listeners, what's the one thing that you would like people to walk away from this conversation with, and more importantly, what's the one thing you'd like to see them do?
I think what I'd like them to walk away with is this crystal clear understanding that we've arrived in a time of history unlike any other time in human experience. And by that I mean that up until now, up until the last maybe 30 or 40 years, human society's culture and tradition has been shaped by religion and government, whether that was the shamans and the kings, or that became the church and the state. But either way, for 12,000 years, the human society, human norms, human values, human culture has been shaped by religious and authority figures. The shapers of human society now are businesses, commercial ventures, global corporations, local corporations, regional corporations, and so business leaders have become. This is super critical for people to realize. Business leaders have become the de facto shapers of society, and the reality is that the vast majority. I mean, you and I are so into this conscious leadership, we think it's everywhere. Yeah, that's baloney. It's an emerging idea that's being mostly butchered and sort of bent to meet commercial needs again. But the vast majority of leaders have not been trained to take on that mantle of responsibility, to use your word responsibility. It's not just responsibility for their business, it's responsibility for the human race. I know that sounds radical, but it's true. they're not aware, they're not prepared, and they're certainly untrained. And so what I would love folks to take away is that, man, the time has long passed where we have a choice about whether or not to awaken our conscious leadership.
Yes.
If you're a leader in a business, you are a shaper of society. And do you want to shape it into a mindless, heartless, numb zombie nation? I hope the answer is no. And so, that's one thing that I really want people to take on, is that we've passed the point where it's cute to talk about it. It's acute, right? This is a real situation here, and we need people to wake up to the conscious leadership. And what they can do, as men, there are books, they can listen to your, podcast day in and day out. They can read books, they can engage with communities. We have lots of resources for people to step into it. But I would propose that it's almost impossible to do it alone. And I'm not saying that as sort of an obvious ploy for people to rush up to us and hire us as coaches, but we cannot, in the own echo chamber of our mind, transcend our own foregone conclusions and beliefs. We need people around us to support us in the growth. So take on a personal spiritual practice of whatever kind it is to grow in consciousness, to grow in awareness, and connect with other people to help accelerate that.
Well, thank you for that, Eric. That was beautiful. I love the way you expressed it. I love the passion that you have, and I share your sense of acuteness about this is essential for the continued existence of the human species. That's where I am. That's part of the reason for this show and the network, is to help leaders, help listeners realize the urgency of where we are as a species. It's been an absolute delight being in discussion and conversation with you today. Thanks for being on the show.
Thank you, Tom, for inviting me, and thank you for creating this platform and context for getting this into the ears and the hearts of as many people as we can, to turn them onto their inevitable responsibility and to equip them on how to take it on.
So, Eric, for our listeners, how can they best get in touch with you and have an opportunity to learn more about you and your work?
The website for my consulting business is Sagatica.com. Sagatica, Sagatica, Sagatica.com. There's also a website, Eric Kaufman, my name, Eric Kaufman, Kaufmann.com, and that has more of a self-learning digital downloads. There's videos, there's audios. You can get my book on there, or you can get my book, The 4 Virtues of a Leader, on Amazon or on my website. But I invite anyone to call with a question or an argument. And thank you for inviting me to be part of this. And I look forward to many more conversations.
All right. Well, thank you.
You're watching the Impact Effect Network. Thank you for joining Tom Eddington on the Impact Effect. Visit ImpactEffectNetwork.com to connect with Tom and discover additional episodes featuring today's top leaders making a global impact through conscious leadership in the world today.